Welcome to the Obvious Leadership Podcast, where we dive into practical leadership insights that are, well, obvious. Your hosts have walked the talk, and now they're sharing their knowledge, strategies, and advice. Let's jump into today's episode and explore the world of leadership with your hosts, Joey and Omar.
So last we left off, we were talking about store performance, right? Location performance. And I think the topic we left off on was those stores that we think are performing poorly, but if you look at the numbers, their close rate is actually above. They're doing a great ton, but those stores that seem to be in like a good location that seem like they're closing a lot, but when you actually dive into the numbers, they're missing it. There's so much lost opportunity that it's leaving that location without being actually taken in.
Right.
But leadership's looking at like, oh yeah, that's the golden store. That's a golden child. Like nothing can top that.
Yeah, man. Honestly, I've been in every situation, when it comes to retail. It's crazy how I think in any retail situation, I think that's kind of what it boils down to. I think most of the managers look at those stores and they say, emulate what those stores are doing. And, truth be told, that's not what they want us to do. Right.
Yeah. Oh yeah. I think I was telling you, right, that at one point, at one of the companies I was with, they were trying to figure out what to do with the position because it was kind of like a slow season for me as far as hiring went. And that's how I got into diving into a lot of the metrics. And one of them was the close rates. And it wasn't a metric the company was looking at the time. And the reason I know that is not all the stores had a tracker, but the stores that did, I would go back and I was taking a look at the performance. I was like, this store is performing poorly according to the company, but according to the tracker, they're closing at like a 13-15% clip rate. And the goal was to try to get to like a 10%, right? But the way that we're measuring it was inaccurate. And I was like, these stores that are performing like above par they're closing at like a 4% close rate, and they're not inside of a mall. This is a standalone store. Like, how much opportunity are we actually losing?
Mm-hmm.
Like you could only ask a store that's got slow traffic to perform so much before you're asking to do things outside the norm that they don't have the manpower for, like going outside of the store to bring in traffic, right?
Right.
And to give you an idea, a lot of those stores, it was a manager and maybe 2 or 3 employees.
Yeah.
So they literally didn't have the manpower to leave the store to do stuff like that. But these other stores that were performing great, those were like the better staff locations. I had like a manager, assistant manager, and anywhere from like 5 to 10 employees.
Right. Yeah. So it seems like, maybe those stores were suffering from a location decision that, ended up not being such a great location, or maybe that location hasn't really, grown its legs and started to take off like they wanted it to. Sometimes when you get a new location, it takes a little bit of time, but that's it's unfortunate for those people, for that manager that only has 2 to 4 employees. The relationships between the manager and the employee should be amazing, and really there's no reason why that manager shouldn't be in tune to everything that they're doing. But unfortunately, when they're not producing the numbers that they're supposed to, or that kind of equate to those busier locations, I think stress levels tend to skyrocket. And I think sometimes feelings get hurt, because stress is on everybody. It's coming down from everywhere, from that manager, from the district manager, and probably from corporate as well, for everybody to perform.
Oh yeah, man. And that's always like the crazy thing to look at. And don't get me wrong, I've been in situations where I have managers that have that really good relationship with their employees where those employees don't want to leave, right? And I have others that, they're biding their time because they're either going to leave or they're waiting for an opportunity to move into a different location that's going to be that's a better performer in their eyes, right? But yeah, the location thing, and don't get me wrong, I get it from a business perspective, because with that organization, a lot of the reason we had those like slower stores is because of the way the business worked, right? It was low rent, low overhead, and it
Right.
wasn't so much how much the store itself was selling, but also how much they had sold, because they're also getting paid in the arrears, right? I mean, they're making money on the back end through services that they had already sold. So the longer that location is active, the more money long term they're actually going to make.
Right.
So like I understood that, but also when you're looking for new service outside of like upgrading existing members, right? There's only so much you could do. And it's like, okay, so let's look at it from a different perspective. Instead of asking the stores that have slow traffic and low employees to increase their performance, because if they increase their performance by 50%, they're almost going to be closing at a 20% clip, but that's still only going to be X amount of new clients every single month. Whereas
Right.
these other stores that you think are performing great, if we can get them to just double their performance, they're still not at 10%. But if we can get them to double that performance, they're now giving you about 3 to 4 times more than that slow performing store would, or that like low number store that's performing high is doing.
So let me let's kind of put this into perspective, right? So
Yeah.
let's talk about, let's say in a week, a slow store, let's say they see 10 people per day, 10 people per day. And they are closing at let's say they're closing at a 10% close rate, right?
Yep.
So that would be 10 out of those 100 people, right? Okay.
Yep.
So you're saying, okay, well, hey man, maybe we can get their close rate to 20%. That's now 20 people instead of 10, right? Let's say we have a busy store that's 500 people that walk into that door, right? 10% would be 50, right?
Yeah.
20% would be 100. So what you're saying is maybe the manager should focus on the busier store. You'll get a bigger impact. They have more opportunity to increase that close rate. Whereas a location that is a little bit slower, not necessarily performing on the level of that busier store, but honestly, that busier store has more opportunity to increase their sales.
Oh yeah, big time. And it makes sense from a business perspective to focus on the larger location to increase. I got a little anecdote on that one from personal experience that happened to me. But question for you on this, and I'll give you my answer to it because it's actually something I did. All right, you're a manager, brand new manager, and you're offered one of 2 locations. You can take a location a little bit closer to home. It's already performing well. So there's not a lot of maybe upside that you can really bring to the store immediately, right? Maybe long term, there's definitely going to be some things you can do. Or take a store that's almost an hour away, but that you can have an impact on numbers almost right off the bat within like 30 days. Which would you take?
I mean, honestly, I'm hungry, man. I'm looking for that performance. I take the one that I can make an impact in 30 days. Because you know what, I'm gonna outperform that other store that's doing pretty good, and I'm gonna put that store on the map. That's what I would do, and honestly, that's what I've done.
And I'm the same way. That's actually the first management role I took. That is exactly the position I was put in. I was given the choice of 2 stores, one that literally was like 5 minutes from my house, performing well. And don't get me wrong, the money off the bat would have been nice. And then the other option was almost an hour away. The store had at one point been a really good performer in the market, probably one of the top stores in the market, but had fallen out throughout the years.
Yeah.
So I was like, okay. And that's exactly what happened. I turned that store around within 30 days, and I had leadership outside of my local leadership reaching out to me about, different questions, different opportunities, what I was doing. And I don't think that a lot of managers, when they first start off, truly understand the impact they could make for themselves, and their reputation.
Right.
Right. Because they're like, man, I really want that big store. It's like, let's get you going first, and let's get you started, and let's see what you can do. Right.
Yeah. Well, so I guess the follow-up question is how long do you stay at that store?
And that's the big question. I mean, for me, I was out of that store in Texas at that point. I moved from California to Texas in less than a year.
Wow.
Right.
Nice.
But that really is the question. Because what you'll see is, and I've had this on both sides, right? I had employees who wanted to grow as soon as possible, and it was constant like fight, like, okay, there is a process. It's not like just any store is going to open up and I'm going to be able to put you in that store, right? We got to see how everything is going, because especially once you're at a district level and above, you really got to play. It's almost like a chessboard, right? You have to know what pieces you have, and you have to understand the personalities at those locations and how they're going to affect one another. Because you can't just put a leader who's stuck in this rut and is rigid and isn't willing to like change, right? To meet the needs of the team. So I've had that, and then I've also had leaders that, you know, I'm the most successful person in my family. I don't feel like I need to move up.
Yeah, right, right. I've already gotten the title that I wanted, so I'm gonna get where I get and kind of stick it out, right? And unfortunately, sometimes, just depending on how they got that position is really determined on how they're going to manage that location, right? Were they the best salesperson to to live on the face of that earth, right? Of that retailer, and then that's how they got that management position. Sometimes that's the way it works out, but they don't necessarily have the tools to implement coaching, to solve for problems, and kind of fill in those gaps where you can make that big impact fast than anybody else.
Yeah, and that's very true. I think one of the hardest things for me as a leader to see is to see another leader that's almost like checked out, right? Because it's not you that is the issue so much.
Yeah,
it's the issue is now you're doing your team a huge disservice. I remember, oh man, so I had been asked to take over a different district to turn their numbers around, and one of the guys who was running one of the stores I was taking over, I had hired the guy. All right, so I'd seen him grow from a store associate into assistant manager to store manager, and man, it was a job, because I'd taken over, and the leader at that market had done a bunch of hiring right before I had left, or right before we switched, right? So I'm like, I can't just fire these people that I just got hired on. I don't know anything about them. I don't know their performance or still training. But like one guy that he had at this particular manager, right? He's like, Omar, this guy's just not getting it. He's not performing. And remember, I was talking to you about in the previous organization, if you weren't performing within 14 days, by the 30th day, we're trying to get you out.
Right.
He was stuck in that mindset. And I'm like, listen, you got to train him. We can't judge his performance yet because you haven't trained him from what I've seen. He's still green. He's still new. You're not spending time from when I'm at your location, I'm observing and you guys aren't busy and he's with the customer. Afterwards, it's not like you're helping coaching him. It's you're berating him. And it's like, you got to take that a step back, and you need to understand he's still new to the organization. I looked at his resume. He's still new to sales.
How
he got the position, different question. But he's here. That's what matters. And I don't want to go through the process of having to fire him before we've actually given him a chance. And this falls on you. What I ended up doing is I switched him, the employee, to a different location under a different manager that I had learned was a much better trainer, or that was a reputation she was getting anyway. And when I tell you the difference it made in that dude's performance, he went from being an underperformer to he was performing.
Yeah, right.
And it wasn't like he was an average performer. He was actually performing well because he was happy. He had somebody who was coaching and training him and developing his skill set. And that's all it was, you know?
Yeah.
You can
Well, I
have
mean,
those,
that kind of speaks to the versatility of managers, right?
yeah.
Yeah, and how you need to appeal to different mindsets, right? And not everybody in your team is going to have the same mindset, and you're not going to make the same impact, and that kind of goes back to your first question, man. Like, what just because you make an impact in 30 days doesn't mean that you're done. You know what I mean?
Nope.
Like that's only the beginning, right? But what if you did? What if your only option was to take that position that was closer, that was already running like a well-oiled machine, right?
Mm-hmm.
Can you still find that opportunity to make an impact, right? And that
Oh,
really your versatility as a manager, right? You still have to find those opportunities to make a bigger impact with the people that are there. Because, and be honest, man, nobody works at 100% all the time. You know what I mean? That's not what happens, but wherever you go, you have to be able to find those opportunities to make an impact. And, really you have to dig deep within yourself to change your approach. It depends on the people that are working under you so that you can have that kind of impact mentally, and of course on the reports that are going to be coming out, depending on, what you're measured on.
Oh yeah. And as a leader, KPIs, right? The key performance indicators are always going to be important. Because you have to know what you're aiming for. If you don't know, you're just pretty much trying to throw spaghetti on the wall, see what sticks, or you're shooting darts in the dark, right? And as a leader, that's one of the biggest things that you can do is ensure your team knows what the metrics are. But I also think one of the worst things as a leader, and this is typically not the leader themselves, but coming from the top, is when that's a constant weekly shifting like issue, and it goes from being all right, cool, we're training, we're performing, to run this fire drill, run this fire drill, run this fire drill. It's like this can't be the most important thing if it wasn't yesterday. Like, what's going on?
Yeah. So that constant shift of focus kind of confuses the employees, essentially, is what you're saying.
Yeah, and the issue there is it's a training issue. It's a coaching issue, right? Because you're missing certain KPIs, you're missing certain metrics. And yes, you can run the fire drills, and that's going to give you a lift, but it's going to make everything else die down without the proper training. If you have great training, then your team is going to be hitting those metrics. They're going to be hitting those KPIs, and you don't have to be running fire drills.
All right, so I got a question for you now. Okay, so this is something that I've kind of held within myself. Through a lot of my jobs. Okay, so I don't like goals.
Okay.
And I know that goes against the grain. I don't like goals because the reason, I need to justify myself here, but but the reason why I don't like goals is because I feel like if I stick to the basics of what I'm doing day in, day out, with every customer interaction, with every situation that is presented in front of me, if I am consistent, then I will perform. And so the reason why I have that mentality, I try to pass that on to my employees, right? And if I tell them the same thing, hey, look, if you guys do this every single time, you will be successful. Now, laying that groundwork is not easy because you're changing somebody's habits from day to day that they do with every, right? But if you show them the value, and that's what, that's really one of the things that I would coach to, right? Show them the value in doing it this way and keeping your mind open to look for this, you will succeed. And I've always succeeded that way.
So that reminds me of, have you seen Anchorman, the movie?
Yes. Yeah.
And this, in my opinion, I think it's very true when it comes to sales. 60% of the time, it works every time. Right. The scene where he's putting on that cologne, the tiger musk, what it was. Right. And it is very true. And it's hitting the point of what you're saying. And I don't think I'm going to kind of like push against that, your mindset. I don't think it's that you don't like goals.
Yeah.
It's that the way that you're achieving those goals is kind of in that direction where if we shift the focus and do this, the likelihood of you actually getting it is going to increase. It's not going to
Right.
be 100%,
Right.
but it's going to be more. And as long as it gives you an edge than what you were doing before, it's going to increase your performance without needing to put in that much more effort. Right.
Well, so I mean, it kind of goes full circle with our conversation, right? Because I've been in those situations where, man, I'm at a dead store, right? And like there's not a lot of people walking in. You have to go out and you have to find that business. But with the people that are walking in, you need to do the best that you can, right?
Yep.
Now, I've also been in that situation where I'm at a busy store, and man, it's like I've got tons of people walking in, but you know what? The first indication of our team knowing that we hit that goal is when they start to shut down. They start to relax. They start to go away from the basics, right? That's why a lot of times I try to say, like, man, maybe these locations don't need goals. They just need to work on the basics. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Do this every time, measure their behaviors so that we can generate those outcomes, right? And if they focus on that, the performance is going to be out of this world, man. And that's why I say maybe those locations don't need goals, right?
Yeah.
But then it's kind of hard to say with the locations that are slower. Like you put goals on them and they're so hard to achieve. Like, I think it's just better if you measure towards, just a low lying, do this every time, stick to the basics with every interaction and you will succeed, right? Measure them based on behaviors, not on the outcomes, right? I mean, yes, the outcomes are, I think the outcomes are definitely important, man. You can't just churn your wheels and go nowhere, but
Oh yeah.
I think, man, I think there needs to be a little bit more methodical approach when it comes to how are you going to manage somebody hitting a goal, right?
Yep. So with that, and this isn't a single leader I've had in the past. This is like different leaders in different industries. One way that they would do that is get you to believe in a certain lifestyle, right? And
Okay.
I'm not going to say it's a good thing. I'm not going to say it's a bad thing. It depends on the individual. Personally, I've grown to not like that because it's essentially you getting your team members in a state of indebtedness for them to force themselves to continue selling to afford that lifestyle, right? So you're kind of forcing them to live above their means to constantly keep them hungry. And me personally, like as I've grown and matured, I don't like that idea as a leader, right? Because even though, and this is back when you're like a 1099 employee, right? You pretty much, they can't force you to do anything, so it's kind of like the carrot or the stick. But you're essentially, they're giving you the carrot and you're hitting yourself in the stick trying to get that. And it's like the worst thing because then it just everything will probably like really catch on top of you. And that's kind of the hard part, right? What I've learned to do is, and this is as a leader, you have to have the communication with your team. You have to know what's important to them. You have to know what drives their performance. They're going to tell you something, but as you actually get to know your team, you're going to understand that what they told you and what the actual driver is are two different things. They're telling you what they think you want to hear, and this is actually what they want to do. So you need to be able to differentiate, and you have to have that connection with your team. They're not robots, they're people. People have lives that matter to them outside of work. I've yet to meet somebody who is like, oh yes, work is my life. Work is the means to an end for everybody.
Right. Agreed.
That's what it comes down to.
Yeah. Well, in that same breath, man, like I think that it's whenever you train somebody to do something out of just strictly outcomes, you bring out some underlying behaviors that maybe we don't want. Like I'm sure we've both seen it. Unethical behaviors that either put the company at risk or we're doing the customer a disservice.
Yeah. And it's true, right? And that's where I think that like understanding your people's actual drive and helping coach them. Because I would sit down with my employees as not just a store manager, but when I was a district manager, I would get to know all the people in my district and see what
Yeah.
actually drove them.
Right.
And that kind of gave me a better idea. And I would have conversations with the store managers on the performance, right, for individual team players and what their thoughts were so that I could help them try to game plan a different type of approach to leading them.
Yeah.
But one of the things I did was I created a commission calculator, right? And it wasn't like, okay, this is everything you need to hit. What I would do is I would show the people the differences of what it meant for their paychecks if they did, the bare minimum or if they hit above and how that can look and how to be able to connect what it actually meant to hit the two. Because it wasn't like, okay, every single metric is an individual player, individual person that you need to have communication with. Maybe one person could be 5 or 10 of those metrics if you're asking the right questions, right? So it's not so much that you need to overexert yourself, but going back to your thing is if you're asking the right questions and you're doing it this way, the likelihood of you achieving this is going to increase. And that means you'll be able to enjoy this even better than you did before, whether it's buying parts for your Jeep, whether it's, buying more makeup, buying, camera pieces, whatever you want to do.
Yeah.
Now it's going to become much easier and it's going to take the stress away.
Well, so I got a question for you then, right? So where do you think, I mean, in all honesty, I didn't do things the corporate way, right?
Yeah.
I went in and, of course, corporate has their expectations of how things should be done. And, I went in and I kind of analyzed the situation. I thought, oh, look, I think this is a better way to do it. I think we'll have more success doing it that way. Laid the groundwork for, getting back to the basics. I hate my way that I thought was better. But I mean, I did perform, right? And so, like, where do you think the disconnect is when it comes to a corporate expectation versus what is actually getting the performance or, working better than what they've already put out there?
So personally, for me, the disconnect I've seen is the people at corporate are oftentimes far too removed from the reality of the field. And what I mean by that is, maybe at one point they were in the sales field, right? Maybe they were a store manager, maybe they were a district manager, regional, whatever, but now they've moved to a different role.
Yeah.
And I'm not going to knock them as far as their achievements and their successes, because obviously it's increased and it's gotten them to a certain position.
Right.
But once you remove yourself from the day-to-day action, right, it changes your perspective because now you're looking at, performance essentially through a spreadsheet. And, the whole thing that numbers don't lie is true. But when you as an individual manipulate those numbers, that's a different story.
Yeah.
And you're trying to make decisions based on what the numbers say, which it can be helpful, but you also have to understand the realities that human interactions, can change, can evolve. And a lot of it also has to do with like the macroeconomics of what's going on in the world.
Yeah.
Right? Because there's so much that's going to go into play. Technologies are going to change. People are going to change their shopping behaviors. So it's so much that goes into it that once you get to the corporate world, it kind of makes you blind to a lot of the changes at times. And that's when you may see that disconnect between, okay, well, let's do the training this particular way.
Right.
In an antiquated way that, yes, may have worked 5-10 years ago, but we really haven't updated or changed much. Or the execution and the delivery of that training is just so that we can check something off, but there's no real way to certify or to verify that our employees are actually understanding the material, right? To be able to utilize it. And even more important, that our leaders in the field are getting that proper training so that they can ensure that their people are training.
Right.
Right.
Well, I mean, you kind of go through the whole process of analyzing, changing, and implementing a new process when it's at a local level and you're at your own store. Let's say you're at that store where you only have 2 to 4 employees. The turnaround time of that change could be a week.
Yeah.
Whereas corporate could take 4 to 6 months, right? Because you're talking about a whole company wide rollout. That they had to put together trainings. Of course, they had to put together the ideas, and then everybody's got to get on this call, and hopefully they land the message that way.
Yeah.
I think it kind of plays into the way that they want things done. Sometimes takes a little bit too long to shift, and they may have missed the mark.
Yeah. And to your point, right? It's easier to change the behaviors of a small unit than it is to change of a whole company, right?
Right.
Because one's a very large pivot, and think of it as almost like a giant, right? You've seen like in movies where the giant's moving and it's almost like in slow mo, right?
Yeah.
When you're looking at it from your perspective, because it's a huge entity. Like, what the heck's it going to do? Right? It can't just turn on a dime.
Yeah.
But it can happen. And as a leader at a local level, right? If you're a store district, you have to understand that change is going to take a while for it to reach the entire organization. But
Yeah.
what you can do is help implement it locally sooner.
Right.
And I've been in that before. I remember one of the previous companies, they had an organization, a very big consulting company, McKinsey, come out and do a 6-month program with us to try to see how we could increase our performance as a company.
Yeah.
I will say this: me and a few of my peers were a little bit miffed that they did that, because we were also in the process of essentially creating a rollout. We had created new hire employee training. We created, started creating trainings for managers, for manager certifications.
I'll do that.
Yeah, me and is like essentially 3 other people that were doing it, right? My focus was mainly like the new hire training. And I wanted to do something with like the management training, because we just didn't really have a good funnel for managers that needed to get replaced, right? Whether it's because somebody left the organization, we promoted somebody, we didn't have a really good way at a national level or even a regional level to know who was a good fit, and at least ensure they knew the basics, the fundamentals, right?
Yeah.
Because we understood once they get into the role, there's going to be a lot of things that they're going to end up learning. But if they know the fundamentals, it just makes your job as a district manager, as a regional, as a director, just so much easier to have that, because you have a bench now. But the reason we were miffed is at the end of the 6 months, and nothing against that company and those people, they did, the people that we met, great. They're obviously doing what they were brought in to do. Their findings were pretty much what we had already told the company. Listen, we need to focus on the basics, right? When it comes to training our people, we don't need this like bells and whistles of, if you do this and then bring this. It's like, no, just get down to the basics, right?
Yeah.
And that's really all you need. If you focus on these 3 basic things, you'd be surprised. And, apparently we didn't know what we were talking about. And they spent like $5 million to bring this company to do that for 6 months, only to come to the same realization.
Well, I mean, man, I'm sharing all my dark, deep secrets here, man. But, like part of me kind of thinks that the problem with a corporation is that there's not necessarily a single person at the helm steering the ship.
Yeah.
Because, essentially, like, if you think about a small business, right? Think about a small business. Everybody's under one roof. Everybody's in tune. You make those pivots as fast as you can to keep up with the economy, to keep up about whatever else is going on, whatever can influence your business. You make those adjustments really quick. But as soon as you get the location number 2, now you split your vision, your time, right? And hopefully the people that are at the location where you're not are doing what you want them to do, the way that you want them to do it, the way that you know is going to execute the best way.
Yeah.
Right. And so if you haven't spent time with the leader at that second location and made sure that you guys are on the same page, that they have the same expectations of the people at that location that you do, your vision gets lost. Right. So could you imagine, like, you know, expand that to 100 locations, right? Now you're trying to get 100 people having the same vision that you do. And some feel like it gets lost, man. Like, so then it's like, what, like, if it's better for business to have one location, just stay there. You know what I mean? Don't expand. You're only going to dilute your passion, if you open the more locations you open, right? And I know that's against, making more money and things like that, but like, I just feel like maybe you should stay at one location, man.
Well, that goes down to scalability, right? Because like for us, when I was doing the whole training thing and creating the program, it was a matter of the biggest issue that I had to solve for, and where we bumped heads, was scalability.
Yeah.
You have to make it easy for everybody to understand where we're going and how to be able to implement it.
Right.
In a method that is going to be easy to pick up, right? And it really comes down from the leadership down to be able to implement that. And when they don't, or when there's a disconnect, that's where you start seeing, a break in the chain.
Right.
And obviously moving leadership around that can, help unnerve people to the point where, okay, let's make sure we're doing it the right way, or let's make sure we're actually getting in line with the direction we want to go. And here's the thing, right? Being a business owner is completely different than being the leadership. And you can never have the same passion as you was as the business owner, because it's not your business.
Right.
Unless they have like an employee stock program or employee ownership, which is a different thing.
Yeah.
It makes it very tough for everybody in the organization to have the exact same vision and the same drive as the business owners.
Yeah.
That we could do there, but there are ways for us to be able to get in line with that. And like what you're talking about is a scalability issue. And for some people, it's tough for them. And oftentimes it can make or break them as a company once you start getting multiple locations, if they don't have a way to scale themselves to ensure that everybody is understanding the basics and the direction that we want to go in. Right.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think you touched on it, man, because, you said spend time with the people that are teaching that vision, right? If you as an owner can empower those people to take your vision, and act on it, right? And spend with those guys, develop that vision, right? Develop how they'll have an impact on the business. I think that's where the attention needs to be, instead of just on the performance.
Yeah. And it really is, right? And like I've been in an organization that's grown from 200 doors to, over 1,000, right? In a short period of time. I've been with an organization that's, decreased the number of doors, by the hundreds in a matter of years. And there's always things that are going to change, but a lot of that has to do with scalability and with the type of leaders that you have in, and the expectations of those leaders, right? Because you need to ensure that everybody's on the same, almost same wavelength of what we're going to be doing. But you can't expect them to go above and beyond when you as a leader organization aren't really going to implement that, right?
Yeah. And that's one of the things, I guess, it gets me down when I see that organizations focus on performance rather than investing in your leaders, man.
Oh yeah. And I think with that, brother, we'll be cutting it for today.
Okay.
So love our chats. I can't wait for it for the next time. So for everybody listening, watching, hey, thank you for your time. Make sure to reach out to us with any questions you guys got.
Yes, sir. I appreciate it, man. Looking forward to it.
All right, Joey. Take care.
See you, man.
And that brings us to the end of today's Obvious Leadership episode. Remember, every great leader starts with one step, and you're already on your way. Small changes lead to significant impact. Until next time, keep leading with purpose, and remember that leadership is the key to unlocking extraordinary results.